For the rest of this chapter, you will notice that the sequence I named New at the end of the previous lesson has been retitled Sequence 1. You can either change the name of the sequence by just clicking on the text of the name and typing the new name, or leaving it and use the sequence we named New, the same as I'm using Sequence 1 for the rest of the chapter. The content is exactly the same, it's just the name that is different. Something that you should also check whenever you start a new project are the preferences settings. The preferences can be found under Premiere Pro, Preferences, if you're working on a Mac, and if you're on Windows, they are under Edit, Preferences. So I'm on a Mac right now, and I'll choose General. This opens a new panel, and in here we can see things like pre-roll and post-roll, how long in frames the video transition default duration will be, and how long in seconds the audio transition default duration will be. And of course, if I am bringing any kind of still images in here, how long they would last in the timeline. You will notice as we advance that it's going to be a playhead, which in Adobe World is known as a CTI, which stands for Current Time Indicator. Whether you want to show clip keyframes on new audio tracks and the new video tracks as well. More about keyframes a little bit later on. In here, you can also select if you want to play the work area after you render, and you can also default scale to frame size. Default scale to frame size refers to when you're working on a particular frame size on your sequence, and then you bring a file that does not match those settings, is either larger or smaller. Premiere can automatically default the scale of this file to whatever your sequence is. In other words, it's going to make it larger or smaller to fit your sequence. You can also set in here the behavior of the bins. For example, if you double click, you press and hold Control on Windows or Command on Mac, what happens if you double click, and of course what happens if you press Alt on Windows or Option on the Mac if you double click the bin. So you can change these if you wish, and you can also choose to render the audio when rendering the video. These are usually the preferences that we navigate to the most. There are other preferences as well. There's one for appearance. I can make my display lighter or darker. I'm going to leave it at default. Audio, I can change what my audio behavior will be, things like auto match time. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. What my surround mix down type would be. If I want to hear the audio while scrubbing the timeline means when we grab the playhead or CTI and we move it back and forth across the timeline. Play audio means that I will hear some of these audio samplings while I'm scrubbing the timeline. I can also select the source channel mappings. This is important, and we will go over it when we talk about audio, but this is important for when we have a stereo clip and we need to process both channels differently. We will also talk about automation keyframe optimization that has to do with the audio mixer and automating these tasks. You can also change audio hardware and the buffer size, audio output mapping, auto save. This one is also important. You can automatically save your projects. Basically, this one is set to automatically save every 20 minutes and have a maximum of 5 project versions. So I can go back 100 minutes in the past as I work on my projects because of the auto save. So it's going to give me 5 versions of the project that I'm working on, and it's going to save on top of the earliest one every 20 minutes. I can change this to every 3 minutes or every 5 minutes, etc., etc. Capture, we will go over this when we talk about capturing, but I can abort capture on drop frames or just report them, etc., etc. For device control, I have 2 devices that I can have, DV or HDV. If I had a third-party hardware installed in here, maybe SDI or something, it will appear in here, maybe a Matrox card or something like that. I can also change the color of my labels. This refers to how my files are going to look in the project panel or in the timeline, so the colors that they're going to have. and what color Premiere is going to by default add to each particular clip. Media. When Premiere Pro imports video and audio in some formats, Premiere Pro processes and caches versions of these so that it can use them when generating previews. This improves performance because the files, once they are processed, do not need to be reprocessed. These preferences indicate where these files are going to be saved and whether or not you want to write some metadata information or even enable the linking, like in here, enable clip and XMP metadata linking, will happen when you import these files. So, just to reiterate, these settings refer to metadata and whether or not to link it and where to save any cached information. Memory refers to how much RAM you have in your system and how much you should reserve for other applications. So right now, for Premiere, we have 2.5 gig available, of a total of 4, so I have left 1.5 gigs available for other applications. I have also chosen to optimize the rendering for performance rather than for memory. Player settings. The Adobe Player is the default player, but some third-party players are installed with some capture cards. If I had one of those capture cards in here, the player will appear in this drop-down menu. The preferences for the titler refer to which characters are going to display on the style swatches and on the font browser. I can change those in here. More on that when we go to the titler. And the trim window is how much I'm going to trim when using certain shortcuts for video and for audio. So I can change this value here. Notice that it's measured in frames, and the audio is measured in audio time units. And these are the preferences. Once you're done changing them to what you like, go ahead and click OK.